There we go. There we go. So, welcome back, family. You're tuned in to Uncovering Hidden Healing. This is season two, and I'm your host, Arletha Lizana. So, today I'm so excited. We're getting back to our roots literally. So, with this season two, episode two. So, we talk a lot, on this program about healing through foods and herbs and energy and sleep and all of the things. But today we're going to go even deeper. We're looking at the land itself as medicine. So think about it. Our ancestors didn't just heal with what they found on the land, they healed through their relationship with it. So farming was considered and is considered ritual. Growing food is an act of spiritual alignment. It was about sustainability, survival, and sovereignty. But in today's world, many of us have been disconnected from the land, from growing our own food, from understanding soil, and from seeing farming as more than just agriculture. So today, we're asking a lot of good questions. We're going to dig deep, both literally and spiritually. So I am honored today to introduce our guest, a powerhouse in this space, Dr. Kwesi Densu. He is a farmer. In addition, he is an associate professor of political science and coordinator of African American Studies at Florida A&M University. He does research in the areas of Africana land-based social movements, sustainability, indigenous knowledge, environmental justice, and Africana political thought. He is also the co-director of Lola Hampton Frank Pender Center for Agroecology and a program coordinator with the Center for African and African American Studies. So, I mean, he's not just studying this, he is doing the work. So we welcome Dr. Densu to Uncovering Hidden Healing. I'm so honored to have you here today. So we have our tea here and we're just going to get started. So welcome. How are
Welcome,
you today?
welcome. I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
Awesome.
Good to,
Awesome.
good to see you.
It's
Good to
good
see
to see you too as well. So yes, so since it's a long, long time friend, I'm so honored that he's come on our little show today to, talk to us about all the wonderful things. So we're just gonna kind of dive right into it. I wanted to really, can you talk a little bit about the historical and spiritual connection that Black people and African communities have to farming? Let's just start there.
Well, shoot. I mean, if we're the first people on the planet, in many ways, we're the first farmers.
That's
And
right.
so as long as anytime we talk about African culture, a lot of times when people talk about healing, they talk about medicines, wild crafting, things of that nature.
Hmm.
But central to culture has always been how people produce food, produce textiles, and our relationship to the land to produce the things we need in order to exist. So, farming is central to African human culture in the general sense, African culture in particular. You can't. I think there's an ancestor. I forget his name. They quote him often. He's out of D.C. He said there is no culture without agriculture.
That's right.
So,
That's
so
right.
yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, so like in your research, like you said, what have you found? Like you just mentioned our ancestors, like how did they view the land and agriculture as a form of healing?
So, the work that I do, part of it is around indigenous knowledge and how the knowledge of our ancestors can kind of reshape how we view the world. And
Mhm.
what I decided that I wanted to dedicate my life to is how we relate to the earth itself. And that's such a big part of it. So, cross culturally, African people, in particular, indigenous people in a general sense, have this notion of the earth as sacred. And I know people have heard that the earth is mother, but not in what some would say the Western environmental sense, where the earth is over there, you don't touch it. It's is valuable, and humans are disruptive to it, so you kind of isolate yourself from it. That's what mainstream environmentalism often argues. But you deal with indigenous people, African people in particular, we're a part of the earth itself. So And cross culturally, there are many different names for it. Like the Akan will refer to it as a Sasaya, Yoruba, Onile, Kemet Geb. You just have different names, but the idea is it's a living reality. Uh, we're dependent on it for our existence. We need to exist in right relationship with it. And part of that is how do we provide food and medicines for ourselves? Uh, so we engage the earth as our mother. And in that context, you respect your mother. So I have a farm. So in many ways, I'm very much rooted in Akan traditions. So on Thursdays, for instance, I won't till the soil, or it's a day of rest. It's a taboo day. Um, so these practices become the basis for people to live in right relationship with the earth, and in that there's balance. But because of the Maafa or our enslavement, that whole view of the world is disrupted. It is, I like to say, disarticulated. Like our culture becomes fragmented, and one of the primary ways that is fragmented is our relationship with the earth itself, and all that comes out of that is disrupted. And from that disruption, we have illness on multiple levels. Um, Destruction of the earth itself in turn impacts human communities. So all these things we see with climate disruption, uh, rising sea levels, uh, uh, poor water quality, poor air quality, you know, all of that stuff begins at the same time that we were enslaved. And that's, for me, that became important to recognize that what people call industrialization um, parallels the enslavement of Black people and the colonization of Africa and the Western Hemisphere. Those two things are like two sides of the same coin. You can't separate them. So our alienation from the earth essentially happens at the same time that we're alienated from our own identity. There are a lot of implications for that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You said so much, and there's so much questions I have, and I want to get into. But let's start with like, how did you get it started in this space? Like, so when did you get this spark?
That's funny because for most of my life, I wanted to be a veterinarian. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
most of my life. And then, we went to school at the same time. I say I got distracted and I became an activist on campus. And I come out
Hmm.
of an activist family. So you know how immature we are in undergrad trying to figure
Yeah.
stuff out. So I was like, I don't want to be a veterinarian anymore. And really, I was being lazy. I wanted to read what I wanted to read, do what I wanted to do. So
Mhm.
since I grew up in an activist family, I started taking a lot of social science classes. I became a political science major. Uh, but I never lost that drive. So I'm from the Northeast. And when I came South, I didn't want to go back. And
Mhm.
I went to Tuskegee undergrad. So if anybody knows about Macon County, Alabama, it's tiny, tiny. All you got
Mhm.
is Tuskegee, and then you got the sticks or the forest.
Right.
So that but I learned to love that, and I never really went back. Um, then I moved to Atlanta. Still very much, I had those inclinations, but I had kind of walked away from it. Um, but then one summer, I can't really tell you why. I just started reading books on farming.
Hmm.
Uh, and I ended up going down a rabbit hole. So that was in
Mhm.
my early mid 20s. Mid to late 20s, and I just started going down that rabbit hole. And what I realized, that it really wasn't about me wanting to be a veterinarian, because I grew up with animals. I had dogs, I had
Mhm.
cats, I had snakes, I had hamsters, I had fish. I would take stray
Oh,
animals off the, street. I went to an agricultural high school, but I was in
mhm,
the pre-vet program, uh,
mhm,
trained horses and ponies and stuff like that. I was, I did work in the zoo. I was a junior volunteer. I did all of that. But then when I got into farming, really what it was about is a very practical engagement with the earth itself. So
mhm,
even my perspective around being a veterinarian changed. Uh,
mhm.
like now, my sister laughs because I wouldn't have dogs in the house anymore.
Yeah. Right.
Because they pack animals, they
Yeah. Yeah.
outside doing
Yeah.
work, and I like work dogs now. Like
Mhm.
all the
The
the the
outdoor dogs. Yeah.
the outdoor. It's like they have a place in the ecosystem, and so
Mhm.
my orientation about it all has changed, but at the heart of it is something I return back to. I say, I just
Mhm.
when I was younger, I articulated it as wanting to be a veterinarian, but I think it's something a little more broader.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. So, how did you know? Like, when did you know that you were a healer, though, as well? Like, how did you know that this work is also healing work? Like, when did that come to you?
When I was in undergrad, my mother transitioned. I want to say when I was about 21 or 22,
Mhm.
and a good friend of mine, for whatever reason, gave me this book. She was actually dating a good friend of mine, and his
Mhm.
mother was an activist and poet in Detroit. Her name was Mama Aneb Kogisile,
Mhm.
and she was part of the Black Arts movement. So she gave me this book, and the book was called The Healers. This was before
Yeah.
I
That's right.
had any concrete understanding of indigenous knowledge
That's right.
practically, and
Yeah.
traditional African spirituality, indigenous knowledge, stuff like that. And when I read the book, I saw myself in it.
Mhm.
I was like, this is a road I would want to travel. So
Nice.
then I had to figure out what that looked like, because then we didn't really have access to elders or people that were knowledgeable enough to inform that.
Mhm.
And so that's how I ended up in Atlanta for grad school. That's how I
Yeah.
met you. All
Yeah.
we hung around.
Yeah.
That's how we came into or how I came into early contact with Pramitra and the
Mhm.
Kumbhalamba Festival.
That's right. Yeah.
Spaces we started, to move in to our expand. But you know, that book really it was fiction, but it wasn't.
Yeah, that's right.
I
I
kind
always,
of
yeah, I feel like that. I know it's. I feel like it's not fiction. It's like real life. Like it is, you know. So, and I think it's meant to be that way. It's one of my favorite books as well, you know. So I think it's meant to awaken people, you know,
right.
to their like natural healing abilities, you know. So I believe that everybody has healing abilities, everybody, and they can definitely heal themselves, but they also have larger work to do as well as helping others seeing the healing abilities and within themselves. So, it's interesting because I kind of, in a way had the same thing. So I was just going to school, graduate school for Africana studies, like even in undergrad, like Dr. Finch, my mentor kind of like guided me, but I was all into the, like science, like it's science, 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 right? So when I'm working with him in my dissertation, it was like, and starting to do the work to understand like the Dogon, it was spirituality, so and then it became like healing. And so then I kind of changed from the science lens, even though it's the same thing, to more of like the spirituality and healing lens. And really things started to come together then,
Mm,
so it was like when I got to that point, I'm like, oh, it's like a big light bulb went off, like this is the work I'm supposed to be doing and why,
yep.
just yeah, yeah. So this is awesome. So I mean, let's talk a little bit about like we can go to people don't associate like farming with medicine, although like we get medicine and even food with medicine, but it is. So can you explain how working with the land is physically, mentally, and spiritually healing itself, not even just the crops, but just the actual work?
Yeah, yeah. We live in a society where everything is split. The work we do, our social relationships, our physical bodies, so you go to work one place, you exercise or work out another place, your children are over here, the elders, all that kind of fragmentation or disarticulation. So, and this is not the romanticized farm work either.
Hmm. No, that's good. Yeah, because I
Because
see a lot of that. It's true.
yeah, 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 especially in the age of social media, because
Hmm.
and that's a whole nother conversation. But for me,
We talk about that too. Yep.
yeah,
Hmm.
for me, working on the land is both exercise, it's healing.
Hmm.
I can be in my head a lot. It's a break from that. It's it's what's the word I want to use? Is less. It's less. You're less distracted
Hmm.
in
Less
a
noise.
society that is driven by distractions.
Hmm. Yeah. So you can like you can focus. You can just be like
You
it's
can
less
just,
noise. I totally get it. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's less noise, but it's it's a different type of work, a type of work we've actually been socialized to devalue,
Hmm.
and that's a
Yep.
that's a big thing because it's not romantic. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, another thing is I don't know if you probably familiar with Amadou Hampatamba.
That's right. Yep. Yep. Well, I just read his another book recently, but that's a side story. But yes, I am
Yeah,
familiar with him. Hmm.
he has this. He says people in indigenous societies, Africa in particular, are generalists. We're not hyper specialists. And that's not to say people don't specialize in certain forms of knowledge, but we
Hmm.
know how to do,
That's true.
multiple things,
Hmm.
right? So food production was something everybody did.
That's
It
right.
was a skill everybody needed to have
Hmm.
uh, to build, a healthy food system. So for me, is part of kind of living this lifestyle that I value more than being trained in the social sciences or
Hmm.
a college professor, although that has value. What I learn on the farm, because there's multiple things you got to be aware of, multiple things you got to do, multiple tasks you got to perform in their relationship to one another.
Okay.
You know, um, yeah, and for me, it gives me a deeper sense of myself and what it means to be a
Hmm.
human being, a man, a member of a family. Uh, it's real important, uh,
Hmm.
multiple levels.
No, no, absolutely. So I think about it like, so our ancestors that were here, even in, through the Ma'afa, through enslavement, had gardens as well. So, it was the time period. Like my grandmother, she definitely had gardens and tomatoes and, all of the food because we had to eat, but then in addition, she also kind of grew things that would also be considered sort of like medicine, type things, because we had to, So I think that somehow between that generation, so my grandmother and like our generation, like that value around having farms, kind of like or having a garden kind of got lost.
Mm.
We see the resurgence of it a little bit, but there's like a time period, where it wasn't valued as much. So, I always wonder, like, so can you explain, like, how is like agriculture in general a tool for like our economic, social, and spiritual liberation? How do you use it that way?
Ah, so I
Hmm.
mean, so what you just described is important because at least it's not unique to our people in this country,
Hmm.
but the context for that is the post Reconstruction era and why people migrated to cities during the Great Migration. So, but between our enslavement and then in the post Reconstruction era, the rapid loss of land, lynching, Jim Crow, phenomenon like sharecropping, racial violence, our whole idea was to get away from the South,
Mm-hmm.
and to get away from the land itself because it was a source of a lot of trauma. And then when you add to that this general move in the world towards industrial agriculture, uh, or what they call conventional agriculture, where machines replace small family farms,
Mm-hmm.
chemical fertilizers, pesticides, fungicides, uh, economies of scale. So local communities aren't producing food, corporations are producing food and trading it across continents, transnationally. A lot of food that we eat on the East Coast comes from California. When all these systems begin to develop, producing food in particular for our art people became like secondary. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't a thing. The return to that is questioning that whole process as valuable
That's right.
and necessary. Um, so, what you find is that when we have, and it's interesting how this happens during particular crises, where there's unrest, like during COVID
That's
19
right.
and
Yep.
everything gets shut down,
So
then
true.
people become aware of, man, where I'm going to get
How we
food.
gonna eat? That's
Yeah,
right.
how we gonna eat? What are we gonna do now that we're isolated in these particular local spaces? How do we
Mm-hmm.
live? How do we interact? So you have some of that resurgence now with the Trump administration. It's mostly reactionary, uh,
Mm-hmm.
but still people feel insecure. So then they begin to think about, how do I uh, take more control over my space? And the one thing you should have control over is your access to food, water, and medicine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Bhamana talk about things we do for life as opposed to things we do to accumulate wealth. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and people come together out of social obligation in extended families to produce the staple foods they need in order to exist, not based on the exchange of money. That's how we used to do things. And then
Right.
everything you produce outside of that, it could be food, it could be crafts, it could be uh, in the form of metallurgy, jewelry, art, whatever. Then that's where you can accumulate personal wealth. But
Mm-hmm.
the things we need in order to exist for life are things we share in a communal context, uh, or in systems that distribute it where everybody has access to it. So, like a good example of that is, in this country, air property is a huge thing.
Mm-hmm.
Black communities.
Yes.
So I think, what do they
Mm-hmm.
say, right after Reconstruction in the early 20th century, like 1910,
Mm-hmm.
1912,
That's right. Yeah.
was it close to 12 million acres? But over time, air property is passed down and the number of owners gets larger and larger and larger. Sometimes people critique air property as if our ancestors didn't understand what they were
That's
doing.
right. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
But really, it's the problem is American property law, where you have to put in someone's name, because what
Mm-hmm.
they're doing is actually what we did historically. That land belonged to the extended family, the ancestors, and the children yet unborn, and you
Mm-hmm.
divide it based on use among family members.
That's
But
right.
that's not consistent
Mm-hmm.
with private
Yeah.
property law in the U.S. So it's not that the ethics of that is wrong. What's wrong is it doesn't fit this social political context. So we
Yep.
got to come up with new strategies like land trust,
Mm-hmm.
things of that nature, where land can be held in common, but at the same time, it can negotiate private land tenure in the context of the U.S. So it's absolutely important. Spaces where people can return to for family reunions.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'm big on family cemeteries. You
Yeah.
know, things
Plots.
of that nature, because
Mm-hmm.
we get our identity from the land itself.
That's
That's
right.
another part. And that's a whole nother conversation. Part of our
Mm-hmm.
fragmented identity comes from we don't have a sense of place.
That's right.
Indigenous, not,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's,
it's
mhm.
based
It's
on
so
you.
true.
Yeah. So this
Yeah.
is
You just brought up something for me. So I mean, just talk on it really quickly. So we have land in Mississippi. It's about 278 acres. It's
wow.
their property. It's a great grandmother's, property is passed down. We have a lot of heirs now. Half of the family, matter of fact, three-fourths of the family want to sell it, to a white guy. It's really sad because the intention of that property was for people to have a place to come home to have a
Yep.
place to go, to have a place to farm, to build houses or whatever. And most of the family just wants to sell it. They don't want to have anything to do with it. There's no sense of, like, I have a sense like this is what my ancestors built, and so we need to keep it. But most people, they're like, we need to sell it, even if it's for pennies. So they want
Yep.
to pay pennies on the acre. It's like really crazy. So, and I think a lot of black families are like going through that at this time, and just throughout our time being here in the US. So it's really a big challenge. But I also wonder, like, what are some of the biggest challenges that black farmers are facing today? Because we see different things in the news, and it's like they did get some compensation, they didn't get some compensation. Like we saw what happened recently with USAID in terms of a lot of farmers that were producing things to be sent overseas. That's not happening now. But just what do you think? There's so much going on. What are the biggest challenges that black farmers are facing today?
I mean, it's the same. The challenges are historic. So access to land and being
Mhm,
able to hold on to land, that's been an issue since our in this country post enslavement to the present, and there have been various iterations or various moments where a critical mass of people organize around resolving that issue. So right after
mhm,
Reconstruction, during
mhm,
the Depression, during the Civil Rights Black Power era in the early '90s, there was this case called Pickford versus Glickman. Uh,
mhm,
and that actually extended to the recent Justice for Black Farmers Act that Warner was it Senator Warner in
mhm,
Georgia. He
mhm.
he he helped sponsor that. I think that's his name. Um,
Warnock. Yeah, Raphael
Warnock.
Warnock. Hmm.
Warnock. But that, that's it's the same problem. So the U.S. food system is based on large subsidies uh, coming from the federal government out of the Farm Bill, which is the basis for the USDA budget, and the distribution of those resources to subsidize farmers disproportionately goes to white farmers.
Hmm.
So black farmers don't have access to credit. They don't have access to markets. They don't have access uh, well, because you don't have access to credit, you don't have access to equipment. But this is all based on the big corporate farm model, not like the small farm that's
Hmm.
produced locally for family and community. I think this is my view based on
Hmm.
my experience that with this resurgence of interest in farming as black people kind of, I don't want to say romanticize, but they misrepresent the viability of farming as an economic enterprise in this society.
Hmm.
It's very taxing. Typically, you have one or two farmers in a community that can do well, but the competition over local markets, especially in the organic sector, which is not our people not consuming that food, is middle
Hmm.
and upper middle class white people who are primarily consuming that food. So you got a bunch of black farmers competing for access to these markets or competing for grant dollars and things of that nature. So it misrepresents, what's possible. So whether they're large scale farmers, conventional farmers, caught up in cycles of inequity and the lack of distribution, equal distribution of resources with the USDA, or on a small level, local urban farms, small black organic growers competing with this high end, predominantly white upper middle class market, you see the same problems. I'm of the opinion, and is a brother named Eugene in Atlanta. You probably know Eugene.
Mhm, mhm.
Uh,
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I'm trying to
yeah,
go ahead.
he
Keep talking.
makes the argument of grow where you are.
Mhm,
So I'm a real big proponent of self provisioning. You know,
mhm.
small family gardens, small community gardens,
That's
small
right.
farms, so people can be connected to the land and control food locally, but they also have space and time to diversify the family's income in other areas so
Mhm,
that they can keep the land. You don't
mhm,
have to farm big. Uh,
mhm.
I don't even think that's advisable in a general sense.
Yeah.
And in an indigenous African context, farms weren't big.
Mhm,
Land use and the land people had access to build community in a comprehensive sense was big, but farms weren't big.
yeah.
They weren't large. And people did other things besides farming,
Mhm, mhm.
you know.
Yep.
So that's kind of the model I think we need to consider. But access to land, the
Mhm,
cost of land, the cost of equipment, lack of access to credit, lack of access
mhm,
to markets, it's the same thing, same
mhm.
challenge, just under a
Mhm.
different regime.
Yep. 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 No, I agree. So like one of my mentors in Ghana, so he's a farmer, but he has a whole bunch of businesses, other businesses as well, like, water, just like whatever, telephone pole, whatever. So, a whole bunch of business, but also a farmer. And then even here, I tell people a lot, like there's a lot of like wooded areas. You can have like a food forest. It doesn't have to be big, for your family. So there's so much that you can do. And I'm sure we'll get some questions about that. But let's like give you time to, what are you up to? What are you into? What kind of research are you doing? What's good? What do you want to talk about? Whatever.
What am I into? Right, shoot. This week was spring break, so
Mhm,
planting sugar cane,
mhm,
repairing buildings. We're behind on the farm. I got, we in process of reconstructing a greenhouse. We got that snow. When did that snow come?
Yep, like last month, like what month are we? January, I think.
So
Yeah, and
snow came down here, uh, and collapsed some of the hoop houses because it doesn't snow down here. So that snow sitting on top of the hoop house,
mhm,
the
yep.
roof collapsed.
Mhm,
Um, so it's the beginning of the growing season. So I've been doing a lot of work this week on the farm. It's
mhm,
spring break. I'm also involved in a very beautiful project. It's called the Lola Hampton Frank Pender Center for Agroecology. It's at FAMU,
mhm,
and the center is named after. Well, I co-directed with another person. It's a partnership between the college I'm in, the College of Social Science, Arts, and Humanities, and the
mhm,
College of Agriculture and Food Sciences. And the co-director, her name is Jennifer Taylor. Uh, she's head of small farm programs at FAMU.
mhm,
And this project was in collaboration with a community-based organization called the National Black Food and Justice Alliance. And the idea is to build a center at 1890 land grants that will do the type of work we're talking about
mhm, mhm,
around land tenure, around agroecology. We just call that farming in concert with the earth, around creating food systems in our communities, around medicine, around the relationship between food and public health,
That's right.
uh,
Yeah.
around issues related to climate disruption, because a lot of the reasons we're having these climate problems is because of farming. You
Mm-hmm.
know, things like red tide, water pollution, air
Mm-hmm.
pollution, all of this stuff. A lot of it has to do with the industrialization of farming. So we
That's right.
deal with these issues, research, community engagement, working with farmers,
Mm-hmm.
working with environmental justice activists. Really, what we're trying to do is in an incremental way, because it's a challenge, is build a local food system in the Tallahassee area that speaks to these values,
Mm-hmm.
these ways of doing things, and serve as a model that we can kind of share in Florida,
Yeah.
regionally, Southeast
Mm-hmm.
region,
Yeah.
nationally, and
Mhm.
internationally.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And then we do some programming with well, the head of the Center for African American Studies is a brother named Darius Young. He's a historian. Uh, but we were able to raise some money to build that. And in that center, we have programs around land environment in the African diaspora.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we're developing a relationship, actually, a homegrown grown brother that I actually started farming with in Atlanta, Kashawn of
Mm-hmm.
Hobby.
Yeah.
So people know him. He has the Kwaku Ando Sustainability Institute.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the process now of doing work to set up faculty exchange, study abroad, um, uh,
Mm-hmm.
student exchanges.
That's
He's
awesome.
been well. He's actually a FAM grad, you know, so that's very beautiful in and of itself. But trying to set up relationships with international organizations like Prometric,
Mm-hmm.
like when I
Mm-hmm.
talked about uh, who else? Kasi. We work
Mm-hmm.
with a local organization, Tallahassee Food Network, Mama Maisha Mitchell and Dr. Kasima Boston. They do work in Senegal and the Gambia with women farmers. So
Yeah.
we're trying to do a lot of stuff. We're only in our third year of development. So and then we're on that grant hamster wheel. You know how things are when
Yeah.
they
Yes, especially now, right, with these federal grants. Yes. Yeah.
especially now, which is
Mm-hmm.
creating a lot of challenges. And Florida is unique because of hurricane season,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
so it becomes ground zero in the Gulf. I like to say we're in the Greater Caribbean.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much. Yes.
And to be in warmer areas in
Yeah.
general. So,
Yes.
a lot of challenges we deal with, the rest of the country doesn't in the same way
Mm-hmm.
because we're so
Mm-hmm.
close to sea level.
That's
So
right.
it's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I am working on this long overdue book. It's called The Environmental History, uh, Towards the Environmental History and Political Ecology of the African Diaspora.
Can't
That
wait for
talks,
that.
yeah, that talks a lot about this stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
so between the farm and school,
Yep.
that's what I'm up to.
That's what you're up to. Okay. So we're going to open it up and see if we have any questions from our audience. I saw one that was in there already, but questions, but one is, and while we're waiting for more. So, what's your take on the cannabis industry? So, if you were going to ask about that. So, what is your take on that? So, where do you stand?
Ah, so let me shoot. How honest can I be? I can't tell all my
You
business
can say
online,
whatever
right?
you like. You're going to be totally honest and open, say whatever. Mhm.
So I grapple with it. I used to be all anti weed, but
Mhm. Yeah.
I've grown in my understanding, especially with some of my friends uh, who are healers. Some of them
Mhm.
initiated that
Yeah.
use cannabis in the work they do,
Mhm.
and then a lot of my family members smoke.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I had to get out my feelings with it, and then
Yeah.
Florida in
Mhm.
particular, uh, this whole thing with hemp production has
Mhm.
become a big thing.
That's right.
I felt a way though because part of this hopping into farming with
Mhm.
with with the I could say the current generation, the current emphasis in farming had a lot to do with hemp production and when weed was legalized. So I
Mhm.
was like, people grow weed, but they won't grow food, and that's
Right.
that's a problem.
Yeah.
But cannabis can be very useful. You
Mhm.
know, addiction is always a thing, but shoot, people addicted to sugar. You know,
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
so and sugar's a grass. Um, so it's just I'm
Mhm.
more concerned about balance. Of
Mhm.
course, there's a lot of money in cannabis. Our folks need access to capital. I just
That's
hope
right.
we deal with it in a way that's wise. It doesn't
Mhm.
increase addiction, uh,
Yes.
and it's more helpful than it's harmful. But I don't have no problem. People want to grow weed. I,
Okay, so we got we got a question. So any advice for starting your own at home or community garden? Like, where can people start if they're not in this space already? How can they start? It's the best thing.
I would you just nowadays with social media, YouTube in particular, there's so many videos.
Mm-hmm.
If you have, I think anybody that has space to grow where they live should do it immediately.
Mm-hmm.
You
And
know,
which and what should they grow? Like, what's good for beginners to kind of start growing, and what can they where can they start?
well, it depends on where they are.
Mm-hmm.
I would say first do a survey in your family of what people want to consume,
Mm-hmm.
and based on the zone you're in, where you
Mm-hmm.
live in the country, usually based on the first and last frost dates,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's going
I
to
think
determine.
I think Atlanta is 8B. I think so. Yeah, so that gives people a sense. So
Yeah,
Georgia,
yeah,
Atlanta is like 8B. So above that is
yep,
eight.
yep. So, and I'll just say, grow. That depends
Mhm.
on what you consume. I like
Mhm.
growing foods and stuff from the tropics. You want to mix it with the carbohydrates you consume.
That's right.
In the garden context, that's mostly root vegetables,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Corn takes up a lot of space. People like growing corn, sweet corn in particular, but that takes up a lot of space. So if you're talking about a small garden growing root vegetables, uh,
Mhm.
sweet potatoes in particular, I like to talk about culturally appropriate food. So what did our people grow and why our traditional dishes? So in the South, your collard greens, your
Mhm.
cabbages, you know, people get a little more, I don't want to say eclectic, but expanding beyond black food ways, people growing arugula. I like to expand into other parts of the African diaspora. So like callaloo, Malabar spinach,
Yep.
uh, boniata, malongo. I'm about to
Mhm.
grow some taro root.
Okay.
I grow cassava. There's a white yam down here that's
Yep.
like the African yam.
Mhm.
You can kind of get away with growing that. I grow sugar
Mhm.
cane. So
Mhm.
it really depends on what you consume in your household,
Mhm.
the zone you're in. I don't want to say I discourage. I'm not into the hydroponic, although that can be
Uh-huh.
used in an urban context.
Mhm.
Uh, I like for people to have their hands in the soil, and all of
Yeah,
that.
there's something. It's something about that. I mean, people talk about the healing properties of just being your hands in the soil itself, and like people talk about grounding, putting your feet in this, in the land and the soil. So I agree with that. Yeah.
And supposedly, this hyper, and you would know this better than me in public
Mhm.
health,
Mhm.
especially this hyper use of antibacterials and stuff.
Yeah. Yes.
It's
That's right.
like creating the opposite. I guess similar to penicillin. It's
Mhm.
having an opposite effect that
It's
makes
yeah.
our bodies less resistant to things we should actually be exposed to.
Absolutely.
And so,
Absolutely.
so
Yeah.
that's
Hmm.
important. And then the soil is actually like our stomachs. So, our entire, well, a large part of our immune system is in our intestines, and I shouldn't say stomach, in our intestines, and the
Hmm.
beneficial bacteria, those microorganisms that play a role in food digestion and, and resistance to disease in terms of our immune system, that's the same thing that's in the soil profile.
That's right. Hmm.
So making those associations like healthy soils, the soil functions the same way our intestines do, but for
Hmm.
so all of that is important. But that's, again, Eugene, is like grow where you are.
That's right.
What's your zone? What do you like to consume?
Hmm.
You
And,
know,
and and are there any particular like medicine type, things that you think herbs or things that are used as medicine you think people should grow if they can? Mhm.
so I grow I'm gonna call it yin, but ah I'm tripping. Seriously.
Uh-huh.
I grow seriously. I grow basil, I grow lemongrass, uh I grow bitter leaf. I grow a lot of bitter herbs, or
Hmm.
seriously they call. I grow yellow squash, sweet corn. I told you Malibu spinach, callaloo, uh,
Hmm.
nunum. You heard of that?
Mm-mm.
These are basils.
Oh, okay. Okay. Okay.
Basils.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
grow, I grow a few basils.
Hmm.
Uh, Another one, Adrea or purslane
Parsley. Yeah, I know that.
is
Hmm.
is good. Now that grows wild in a lot of urban areas.
Hmm.
That's a real good. I'm growing some tobacco, but that's more for spiritual use.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I say all that people should grow, you know, what they
Hmm.
need. Seriously, can be grown in the house,
Hmm.
and it's a real good uh, bitter herb for
Yeah.
a number of things. And
Hmm.
incorporating bitter taste in our diet,
It's
I
important.
think is real important. Ailments like I haven't grown this in a minute, but calendula
Uh-huh.
for
Yeah.
skin ailments and healing and stuff, like
Hmm.
herbs for first aid and
Hmm.
things of that nature. People should, do that. I have bees too, so bees for pollination, honey. You can use
Yeah.
beeswax,
Yeah, people actually, you're talking about bees. So one of the questions were thoughts on like any animal farming, like chickens, goats, anything like that as well. So yeah.
right? So I got a bunch of chickens.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't eat, so I have what we're trying to do with this farm is grow where you are.
Hmm.
We're trying to scale it up a little bit to serve families that are part of an organization I belong to, but also a quarter acre will go to communities that are in spaces. People call it food deserts.
Hmm.
Folks in my circle like to call it food apartheid, where that food
Yeah.
is just shared as an obligation at cost or donated.
Hmm.
Um, so say I went somewhere with that and then I
Yeah,
forgot
you
what.
were going to talk about animals or anything like that.
Oh, animals. So I
Yeah.
do rotational grazing on my farm,
Hmm.
so, but mostly with chickens. Like I had. Well, I should say, last year it was over 100 chickens and fowl. I have guinea fowl, and
Hmm.
a bird is called uh, Australorp.
Hmm.
It's a black high producing egg layer
Hmm.
chicken. Um, and I had about 100 of them. Then I had some raccoon and fox problems,
Yeah.
right? But with rotational grazing, when you integrate animals into the farm system, their manure becomes a source of fertilizer, and it diversifies the life. Some people
Hmm.
people call it a soil food web. So the
Hmm.
beneficial bacteria fungi,
Mhm.
all the arthropods, all that stuff that allows for nutrient cycling in the soil. When you put animals in it and you rotate them, not confine them. So all my chickens are pasture raised. They live in the tree line. They only come home at night in the coop, and that's where they lay. So,
Mhm.
you know, that's how, but you need room to do that. There are ways to do that on a small scale
Mhm.
where you can move the coop around in the garden. So it depends. I'm a proponent of try anything.
That's right.
You
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. That's it. I'm like that
take,
too. That's how we're similar personalities. Like try it and
yeah,
see what happens. Yeah.
yeah, try it, but base it
Mhm.
on what you want to consume in the household
Mhm.
and the health needs that you have,
That's right.
right?
Mhm.
In your family, and involve your family in the planning of the production space, whether it's small like a
Mhm.
garden, or
Mhm.
if you got access to land, or if you have access to air property. I
That's
would
right.
say try. You're going to need help though. That's the other
Mhm.
thing.
That's right.
And
Yes.
another thing is plan monthly gatherings of family and community around eating what you produce.
Mhm. Yeah, I
You know,
like that.
that's
Yeah.
that's real important too.
Yeah. Yeah, like that. And I think that's exciting as well because like when you start producing it and you share it with your family, I think it just builds more excitement,
It
about
does.
possibilities. And then we see more people wanting to participate. So I think that's awesome. I mean, this has been like such a powerful conversation. Like, but before we wrap up, like, if you people take away one lesson from today, one key thing. So what do you want them to know? What do you want people to take away from this conversation?
Go back to the land.
Go back to the lane. Yeah.
Yeah. Like we got to reconnect concretely, not just in our heads.
That's right.
Right.
That's
So
right.
if anything, that we're better off when we're connected to the land itself. And
Mhm.
we're either going to change or the earth is going to force us to change. So
Mm,
we got to
there's that.
choose.
Yep, there's that. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, I want to thank Dr. Densu for sharing your wisdom today. It's been awesome. But like how do people connect with you? How do they learn more about your work?
Uh, Dude, put them in contact with me through Arletha. She'll be able to give you feedback. Because
Okay.
I don't have a social media account
You
and
don't
none of that
believe in
stuff.
that. Yes.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And then the center is
mhm.
we're trying to get a website, but it's a lot
Okay.
going on in Florida. So
Okay. Yes, I can understand that.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So,
And
yes, I'll
they
put you into and you're at FAMU, so
yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
the
Definitely,
professor.
I'm at FAMU,
Yeah,
but I don't.
anything you want to say to the students, or the young people?
No, I mean, just know, take some. I would say simply, take some time off the phones and social media. Find a
Mhm,
community garden.
mhm.
Uh, find members of your family that are doing work like this.
Yep,
Engage in it yourself. When I did it, the first time I did it, it was in the back of Florence Jackson in Atlanta
yep.
when I was teaching there as a young graduate student, and I just jumped.
Mhm.
So grow where you are, as Eugene would say.
That's right. That's right. So, I mean, thank you so much. This has been so awesome, and everybody out there, thank you for joining. Next week we're going to be talking about healing through the plate. So, Black traditional food as medicine and
That's
the
good.
power of ancestral foodways. So, we have Chef Zaza and Zali is going to be our
Uh
guest.
oh,
Yeah, yeah, next week. So, we're going to
that's
talk
what's
about
up.
that. Yeah, we have the African and African Diaspora Natural and Traditional Medicine Certificate Program that we've been developing and talking about. So there may be some interest from our audience in that, really just learning about, it's a very beginner, kind of basic certificate to help us learn, about our African and African diaspora traditions. So, thank you so much. If you love this episode, drop a comment below. Let us know what you're growing, how you're reconnecting to the land. Let us keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay rooted, stay radiant, and keep uncovering hidden healing all around you. So peace and blessings and
Peace.
thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate the conversation.